Hi, everyone. I am so excited because I am speaking with author Susan Welch, and we are talking about her brand new book, debut novel, right? Just
Yep,
came out May 1st, A Thread So Fine. And she's going to hold, do you still have the book right there so you can show everybody
I
the
do.
book? I
There it
love
is.
this cover. This is my favorite cover of the
Oh,
two covers. I love this cover. And oh God, Susan, this book I read it, I finished it today. I started reading
mm,
it yesterday and then I finished it today. And I do not have a sister, okay? But I gave birth to sisters. So
yeah,
I have daughters. And I like reading the title, you're almost like, what does that mean? And then you read the book, you're like, oh,
yeah.
that's what that means. I understand. I have 6 children, okay? But
Oh my.
the two girls are in the middle, okay? And there's a 4-year age difference between the two of them. But I'm telling you, when I'm around them, sometimes I don't understand. Like, I know them individually, but if the three of us are together and they're kind of bantering, I don't understand that. Like, it's like a language I don't
Yeah,
understand, you know?
yeah. I do.
And so you
I
did
do.
that so amazing with these two sisters, like, because the mom, I think, felt kind of like me too. I don't know that she was really keyed into what their relationship was like, but I just know that one time we went shopping and they were screaming at each other, and I thought they were so mad. Like, I was like, "Oh my God, this is horrible." They're gonna, and then they left together, and I left alone. They like got
Yeah.
in a car together. I was like, "Okay." Like, I
You know,
just
that's a really interesting point. I think sometimes we ascribe, like, I hadn't really thought about it, but the sisters assume that their mother is distant for all sorts of reasons, but from Nell's perspective, it probably seemed a little unfair that they were they were self-sufficient. Their
yeah.
relationship really almost precluded the need for a certain layer of mothering. That's
Yeah,
true.
I found myself getting very teared up in a lot of
Mm,
what was going on with the two of them, and not just what their circumstances were, but also because of their relationship. Because I
mhm.
wanted them to be, I was like, no, no, don't, don't go away from your sister. Like, that's your
Mm.
sister. But I know my daughters have had close times, they've had not close times,
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I've watched it and I don't understand it. Like I said, I have a
Yeah.
brother, so it's not the
Yeah.
same at all. It's just not. All those hormones are missing, so it's not the same at all,
Yeah, no, it's so true. Yeah, part of my discovery in writing this book was discovering that I have more sisters than I thought, and
Mm.
I have created new relationships, and those threads. I mean, yeah, it's this idea of the invisible threads that bind us to the people in our lives. It's really powerful, and it was interesting to me. You might have noticed in the early pages of the book, and throughout the book, I reference The Princess and Curdie, which is a children's novel.
Yeah.
And in that novel, there was literally an invisible thread that tied her back to her loved one. And if she could just find that thread, she'd be fine, you know? And I thought, man, what a brilliant trope that was over 100 years ago to sort of explain or illustrate the importance of those threads that we have in our lives, even though sometimes they go invisible on us, or maybe they're invisible. These threads that I've just recently discovered, they've been invisible for 56 years, and I've just found them.
Wow.
So that's been fascinating, and
Yeah.
sort of like a fruition of the story of the book in a way.
Yeah, I was talking to an author who wrote a sibling book, and she brought up a really good point that I only have one sibling, okay? And she said, we're taught, our parents teach us from the time we're born, take care of your sibling, take care, you two are, but then you become
Yeah,
adults and you have lives, and then you don't know what to do. Like, you don't hear that, you hear that, that repetitive take care of. My brother's younger, and it's like, oh, how long am I supposed to take care of him? Like, how long am I supposed to do that? I don't know when to stop. I don't know,
yeah,
and it's like a relationship that we really don't know what to do with at certain
that's so
times in our
true.
life,
Yeah, it's kind of along the lines of, you'll grow up and get a job, and when you're young, you're slightly terrified about that. Like, what does that mean? When do I have to do that? And as far as siblings, go, Michelle. My goodness. I mean, I think I let go of the thread with my own sister, the one who I was, raised with for a while. But we picked it up again relatively recently, 4 or 5 years ago, and so much stronger than I ever thought it would be. Our roles have kind of morphed and changed, who you are when you're little in that role, in that sibling role. I would, certainly with your two daughters, who they were as, 6 and 8 year olds is only partially who they are 20 years later. And in some cases, I think, especially in the case of the book, those roles almost reversed by the end, which was very interesting to me writing it. So often you think that you're the weak one, or you're the smart one, or you're the good one. And that can change a lot in the course of a lifetime. So,
and it's funny, my youngest daughter just graduated from college this weekend. And in front of everybody, in front of the family, she said, well, now I have to be your favorite because my older daughter didn't graduate from college. She said, so now I did, so now I have to be your favorite. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, calling in the cards.
Calling in the cards.
Yeah.
I graduated, so now I am. But, when I'm reading this book, and like I said, so many times, like I would tear up, and not just because of the subject because you hit so many great topics between the two of them, and but I kept thinking to myself, which one did you love writing? Like who was your favorite one, or did you just finish one and then be like, okay, I'm ready to go back to Eliza, I've done Shannon, or I'm ready to go back to Shannon's story? Like, was it, or did you relate to one of them more?
When my first draft of this novel, I actually wrote the chapters Shannon, Eliza, Nell, Shannon, Eliza, Nell, like they were one chapter each. And then an editor that I was working with suggested that I change that. And she was right. It was really hard to do it, but I know it was the right thing. But because I did that, it was like I would pour myself into Shannon, and then I would pour myself into Eliza, and then I would pour myself into Nell. And the fact about these characters, Michelle, Shannon and Eliza in particular, but all four of the women, are very much drawn from really important women in my life. My sister, my birth mother, my mother who raised me both, my mother-in-law, my mother-in-law's sister, my sister-in-law, all of these people, all these women in my life who have certain characteristics, I sort of brought them into each of these characters. Probably most directly my mother-in-law and my and her sister, because they were so different from each other. That it made it kind of easy to sort of think about it in those terms. I relate very much to both of them. I was the older of two sisters, and I felt utterly protective of my younger sister in every way, and in some of the very same ways as in the book. But I also more relate to Shannon's sense of, she has a naivete and a wonderment about the world that I really like. And I feel like I have that in myself also. So as far as I'm concerned, they're a little bit of a mix, but the characters and the characteristics of them as either, intellectual or artistic, strong, weak, all of that really came from some of these wonderful women, multi-generational women in my life.
Yeah. And then we're going to get to the story, but I wanted to say when you said that, because you're also an older sister and I'm an older sister, I don't think that our younger siblings understand how protective, I don't think my brother understood how protective, especially as a child, I remember him getting mocked at school, and I wanted, I was just going to crawl out of my, he has no idea.
It's true.
Yeah.
I think bystander syndrome.
Yeah, and I do think that he would say, he wouldn't even understand if somebody told, right. He would be thinking he wouldn't know. And we're not in a good place right now. I'm 54 and he's 53, and we're not in a good, he'd never had children. He never got married. Well, he had a little bit of a marriage, but I had a totally different life. I have 6 children. I have grandchildren, and we're not connecting at the moment. So I'm happy to hear that, like, it isn't over. It just changes all the time.
Oh gosh, it changes so much. I mean, my sister told me, she's 2 years younger than me, and when we were children, I was ridiculously protective. I remember one time giving her a list of things that she could not do. She could not look up at the sun directly because that would blind her. She could not walk across a field barefoot because there might be broken glass. She could not walk anywhere near a construction zone because she might fall in. I was so protective. And there were years in early adulthood, late childhood, early adulthood, where we really went our separate ways. We were such different people. And when my mother passed away in 2007, we were both, I think, in our 40s. And at one point during that period of sort of saying goodbye to my mom, Sydney was teasing me. She and my brother were teasing me for being the way that I am. And then she said, but no, seriously, Susan, you saved my life as a child. You were there for me. In some ways, you were more my mother than Betty was, and it meant the world to me. And that really informs the story quite a lot.
I was going to say, I can hear, in hearing you, I can hear them. So that makes me so happy because I can hear Shannon and, say that. And let's just talk about this. So you start the book off in August of 1946. This is a really interesting time period for me. My mom was born in 47. Okay. And it's that she was a baby boomer. My dad was born in 44. So they called them, they were the baby boomers. Okay. And so their life was so completely different than their parents' lives. And I remember her always telling me about that time frame. Even though she was a baby, it was like she was told, it's this, after the war, everybody's like all happy. Everything's getting, everything's good. But these, all the vets are coming back. And they've got to go, they're integrating back into society after what they saw in World War II. And so it's even though it's a happy time, it's also like a very difficult time. And you hit on that in the story. Like I said, you hit so many things in this story. But I know this isn't a giveaway. We've got Shannon and Eliza. And I went back and reread that first chapter today after I was done. Because I wanted to see where you started, even though I just read it yesterday. I have to reread it anyway. And I was like, oh, that's right. Okay, so Shannon was in college, right? Yeah. So we got this girl who's in college and, basically beginning her life away from her family. And she falls ill with tuberculosis. That's not a giveaway. But I saw how you were alluding to it in the first chapter. I was like, I never even picked up on it until I reread it. And I was like, there it is. And I wanted to ask you, was that common at that time? Is
tuberculosis?
Yeah.
So my mother, Betty, who raised me, she had tuberculosis in 1946 in the Twin Cities. Wow. That is where a lot of that thread in the story comes from. It was quite a problem in that decade. Both polio and tuberculosis
I knew about polio.
Were way out of control.
Okay.
In the Midwest in particular, which is what I write about, polio in particular was taking people, it didn't necessarily kill you, but boy, you were out for the count for quite a while.
Right.
My mother contracted it as I think an 18 or a 19-year-old. She spent a year in quarantine, very similar to Shannon. She had 4 surgeries to remove 8 ribs so that they could collapse the lung. And, the thing is, the quarantine itself was bad enough, but there was really no guarantee of survival with tuberculosis. It could be very deadly if the infection got out of control.
First of all,
so my mother and Shannon both spent time in quarantine in a room with a dozen other women. In the book, as with my mother, the women in the ward were much older because Shannon isn't a child anymore, so she's not in the children's ward. She's in the adult ward, and it just so happens that she's the youngest of many. And she's alone for the first time in her life. She's absolutely terrified when she first arrives for that. And, she has to grow up a lot, and it builds that kind of experience, I believe, builds a resiliency that you don't earn unless you've gone through something like that.
I had not that I never heard of tuberculosis. I mean, I've heard of it, but I had no idea the extent of that illness until reading in the book, like the surgery. Like, I was like, are you kidding me? They take
Oh, yeah.
like, I didn't even know all the surgery she had to undergo. I was like, and then they deflated their lungs to then reinflate. Like, I had no idea.
No, they don't ever reinflate it. It's a weird term for what they actually do. To me, it's actually not. It's more like relaxing the lung, and then the surgeries create an environment for the lung to heal. But it's really draconian compared to what they do today.
I was going to say, right? They don't do this today, right?
Was invented in 1945, and streptomycin pretty much eradicated tuberculosis once it got into the mainstream medical treatment. But even though it was discovered in 45, it was 10 years before that was readily available.
Right.
And so they were still doing these rather draconian surgeries that did save lives, but not easy.
They did. Right, exactly. But yeah, right. They did. But I was like, wow, because I had no idea that it was like that radical of procedures that were going on.
Radical. That's the word for it. Radical.
Radical. Yeah. And the fact that, okay, so they're in quarantine. So there she is, like you said, she's all by herself and she's having to grow up by, like her mom and dad. I was like, can you imagine as a parent? Like being like, okay, we're going to go see her on Sunday. Like there's barely communication. They're writing letters. I mean, what we take for granted. I mean, so
no texting,
barely calls, barely, receiving letters. The girl can barely write because she's sick. And as a mom, she's got kids at home and she's like, I'll come see you Sunday. Like we can't fathom that whole thing. We can't fathom that. So, I thought,
very true.
Well, as I'm reading it, like I said, I kept getting weepy at different times and then their relationship. I don't want to tell too much because I really want everybody to read it. But I loved how you ended the first chapter and then I went on Amazon and I don't usually read reviews. Well, I never read a review before I read the book. Sometimes I go back after I'm done to see if anybody agrees. And I think I saw at least 3 or 4 people that agreed that you had one of the best first chapters. And so, you know what? When you do, when an author does it well, I get so happy for you. Because I was like, I thought that too. I was like, I'm like agreeing with these people. And you really did. And I know it's hard. I know it's a hard chapter to write.
It's the worst. You have no idea how good that makes me feel because that was... Man, well, where do you start? I mean, that's really a tricky thing. And,
and a lot of times, especially when you're trying to take a reader back in time. And one of your reviewers said this. It's like, you got us there in the first chapter. That is hard to do. That is hard to take us, because we're here. It's hard to take us back. Sometimes it takes me a couple of chapters in until I'm like, oh, okay, now I feel it. But you did such a great job. This is a debut novel for you. I am so happy for you and so inspired by you because I was like, oh my gosh, look at her. She's, it's being received so well. It just came out and you've got all these great reviews and I loved it. And
I'm so glad to hear that, Michelle. It was really a lot of fun to write it. It was cathartic and fun, and I learned so much about, important things like the women's movement back then, which I didn't really know very much about.
That's what I mean. You hit on so many topics, and I don't want to tell people because I want them to experience them in the same way. But, as I'm reading this, I'm like, wow. I mean, like I said, this time period is very tricky. It was a very happy yet very hard for the country, and then we go right into the Korean War, and, it's an interesting time period, Yeah.
So. It is. You hit on the central reason why it's so interesting because we all think of it as this post-World War II optimism on one hand and everything was peaches, but it really ran into a lot of social mores and a lot of things that people felt they couldn't talk about. There wasn't a really strong structure in the society yet to talk things through publicly. So lots of room for secrets and traumas and anxieties and all that good stuff that we explore with our characters.
Yes, absolutely. And I could even see because I said my mom was born in 47 and, her relationship with her mom. And, I could see a lot of that. Just to tell you a backstory, my mom had me when she was 17.
Oh, wow.
So she had to quit high school to have me. And my dad, they had to get married. It was very dramatic.
Oh.
And, you know, but I remember my mom saying to me, well, you know, I didn't know if I could get pregnant or not. I didn't know what the deal was. Right?
Exactly.
And you're looking at her like, and I used to be like, oh, come on. Like, you didn't know. And she was like, I didn't have that conversation with my mother. Like,
where would they have gotten that from? You know, they just didn't exist. A lot of sort of cluelessness. We would consider it cluelessness now.
Yes.
But you know, back then it was just they were coming out of an age of a lot of naivete and not a lot of communication about things like that.
Well, and not with the parent. You know, like you know, I know her relationship with my grandmother. Even after she got pregnant, like they didn't talk about it. It's like, my mom was pregnant, but they didn't talk about it. And then she had a baby, and then they didn't talk about that. And then
and that is I've been talking about that recently with just girlfriends, like, you know, things that are not intended to be secrets necessarily.
Yeah.
They grow into secrets.
Right.
Because you don't talk about them. And then all of a sudden you're one generation in and you realize that your own children don't know, you know, for example, that your mother had to quit high school. It's not that not that it was a secret, but it sort of turns into a secret by virtue of not talking about it.
Right, exactly. It's so interesting.
And that was definitely, you know, with Shannon and Eliza, so many things that
went unsaid
that they didn't talk about.
Right, went unsaid. Yeah. Okay, so before I let you go, what are you working on now?
Well, my writing attention is sort of drawn into two piles. One is I'm toying with the idea, and I'm starting an outline for a second book about the Malone family, focused more on Miriam.
Yes.
Yeah. So more of a 1960s to 1980s generation, or I guess it would be 50s through 70s.
That'll be fun. I love that.
Yeah, that would be fun. Or I wrote a screenplay in the 90s that I am also looking at turning into a novel.
Oh, awesome. Wow. I can't wait to read your next project. You know where to find me, okay? I will read it early, and I'm a huge fan, and I can't wait to see, you know, what happens with this book. I want to see this book go everywhere, and I can't wait to promote it. So, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, I'm going to have the IndieBound link listed below so you can support your local bookstore. I'm going to have the Amazon because you can go on there and get it on Kindle today. And I will put your website and all your social links underneath here. And maybe we'll get a chance to talk again. I really hope so.
I sure hope so as well, Michelle. I just wanted to add that you can buy my book directly from Ingram on my website, if that is of interest to anybody. But I really appreciate what you do. It's been super fun chatting with you.
Yeah, and have fun on your book tour.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.